Just a few housekeeping things for everybody. After Mike is finished speaking at 11:30, we're going to have lunch. There's an opportunity for 2 lunch and learns breakouts. One will be in the Naturalist Cabinet that's marketing with Jesse Schwartzberg and our Nick Gunn. And then in here will be a piece on heating with Mark Seymour and DJ Colbert. So if you aren't having lunch in a breakout, if you guys could kind of sit back and let the people that are going to lunch and learn get their food first, that'd be helpful. We also have a facility and pellet boiler tour that's going to start at noon, and you can meet at the front desk. There'll be a talk about current climate change science that's going to be in Plan at Adirondack, also at noon. And then Leah is going to be wandering around with a really sweet owl. So find her. I think that does it. Okay. So our second plenary speaker is Mike Finney, principal of Finney Design Group, and he's a licensed architect, AIA member, and lead accredited professional with over 23 years of experience in architectural design and construction observation services. He's the founder of Finney Design Group, an organically grown niche company that has developed a reputation as a thoughtful, responsive, and highly creative design firm balanced with great technical thoroughness. After completing his architectural thesis at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute on environmental awareness in architecture in 1995, Mike quickly became a leader and pioneer in the sustainable design movement. He's been a large contributor and team leader on many environmentally sensitive buildings, including our very own bio building here at the Wild Center, the first LEED certified green building in the Adirondack Park. Thank you, and I believe it will be on the tour at noon if people would like to do that. His experience includes building design, interior design, landscape design, land use analysis, and urban and rural planning. His firm has won multiple awards with the American Institute of Architects and both local and national preservation foundations. Mike's early years of being raised in the Adirondacks and strong connection to the natural environment have remained influencing factors in his work and approach to the site and context and community. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks for coming here today. I'm sorry I didn't catch all of Kevin's talk, but I've heard him speak many times and understand it was quite moving. So I'm going to transition into maybe looking at, here's just some examples of what you can do. And I'm not going to take too deep a dive into too much technical, but I want to hopefully inspire or make you think a little bit creatively about the process and maybe what's possible and how you can make a small difference in your own home, but also in other projects. And no matter how small that difference is, it does add up. And I do think we are at a tipping point here dramatically, but I think with the minds that are in this room and the different backgrounds that are in this room, it starts with 100, grows to 1,000, grows to 1,000,000. And, I hope you'll join me in that crusade. So just thanks very much for that introduction, Sally. Not to talk too much about myself, but we're a diverse firm. We're an architecture, interior design, and construction management firm. And we've been around for about 16 years. And about a third of our work is custom residential, and about 50% is resorts and everything associated with them. So hotels, restaurants, spas, retail, so on. So, and then the rest is really commercial, and it's usually mixed use or multi-use of some kind. And we work all over New England. But today I'm going to focus mostly on residential and talk about a couple projects in the park. which is near and dear to my heart. But and then a little overview of the bio building, but I encourage you to take the tour at noon today as well. Just a quick overview about LEED. I'm sure I'm not going to get into this because I'm sure pretty much everyone here is familiar with LEED. But if I could just see some hands of who has done a LEED certified project or been part of a LEED certified project. Okay, a pretty good amount as I expected, but really LEED's looking at 9 categories these days, an integrated process, which is one thing that I think is so important. No matter what the project is. You know, we've done about a half a dozen LEED certified projects over 16 years, and the colleagues that are at Finney Design Group now combined their experience for well over 20 certified projects. But, you know, really it's rare for us. As much as I'm a real proponent of the system, and I still feel it's the, you know, sort of the gold mark as far as understanding, you know, how environmentally responsible your project might be. Not, you know, it's sort of a rare thing for our clients to commit to go through that whole process, but we try to use it as a guide for as many projects as we can, even if it's just communicating or letting an owner know what's possible and why and how their choices may influence certain things. So, and the LEED checklist is a great system. It's something that kind of gives an owner or a client a quick overview of, hey, here are some things to just think about. So we find if we just walk them through that list and explain it to them and what the different categories are, it opens their minds to things that maybe they weren't open to before. 20 years of, or better now, of trying to be a sustainable design advocate, I find myself still educating clients every time, you know, especially in the residential world. A lot of clients, many of our residential clients are first time they've ever used an architect. So, you know, you realize that comes with great responsibility. You have to not make assumptions, so communicate. So it starts with that integrated process. And then there's the other 8 categories that really look at location, transportation, the site itself, water efficiency, energy, atmosphere, materials and resources, indoor environmental quality, innovation, and then regional priority, which is kind of a newer modification of LEED of late, which I think is great. That obviously goes into a rating system based on how you perform in those 9 categories. You get a certain rating from certified all the way up to platinum. So we have certified silver, gold, and platinum. And we're going to show you 3 projects that one achieved silver, one achieved gold, one achieved platinum. But again, LEED is just one part of the formula when we were evaluating a building's potential. So the first project, this was completed in 2010. It's in Saratoga Springs. It's a LEED certified platinum building. It was one of the first platinums in New York. And it's in downtown Saratoga, so it doesn't quite look like it. But it's off of White Street, which was historically a carriage house area. So there were a series of barns and old carriage houses in this area. And it was really sort of the back street to more prominent primary buildings. So this was really where the horses and carriages were stored in this area of Saratoga Springs. And so we took that as inspiration with the building and had it a bit be barn inspired or agrarian influence with the building. But the owner of this project is also owner of a natural food store in Saratoga, and they were extremely sustainable minded. So this is one of those, I hate to say rare opportunities, but where a client was pushing me to go beyond even, you know, what I would normally do. So it was a great collaboration with them and their family, and they were very much committed to being as sustainable as possible with this project. So it started with an infill site in town, close to a lot of public transportation. And as I walk you through, you'll see we really thought not only use of materials and all those things that sort of categories we just talked about, but really about how their family was going to live in this house and how they were going to grow and then how they might transition. So that was a big part of their thinking, was that we're going to make this kind of investment in a structure, we want it to last for generations, hopefully. So they very much had a long-term view in this building, which is also rare, as we know that, unfortunately, so much residential, and especially the way society's moving with young professionals today, many are not even owning homes. You know, they're very temporary focused. You know, the average amount of jobs that a young person will have today, they're saying something like 12, that they'll change jobs 12 times. And so that, you start to say, well, how does that influence their choices about architecture? It's creating some really interesting things in the multifamily and apartments and high density things that are really exciting. But in single family houses, it's really making us question, you know, how this house can adapt to maybe the next family or the next group. And we have to, as designers, start thinking about that. Just talking about the site, we, again, and I'll use this mouse because I'm turning away from you. But this was the lot here, and it was really a double lot that they purchased. There was a shed kind of barn storage structure right here. So this was a previously sort of developed and built site. And they wanted to preserve the double lot so that this could always be a green space. It worked out really well because that happens to be solar south. So that was one of the reasons why they picked the lot, so that the house could be on an east-west axis, take advantage of passive solar design, and also active solar design, which you'll see. So that was one of the first priorities, was to push the house to the northern end and preserve the southern lot, build on the previously disturbed area, and so on. So we also did extensive analysis of the lot as far as permeability. We tried to keep the lot at over 77% vegetative landscape. You'll see that we did incorporate a lot of rainwater management and control. And but even during construction, we were very careful as far as how we disturbed the site. So we fenced off this entire area here, which had some nice existing vegetation and so on, and so that contractors couldn't go there at all. And then we created a stockpile area for soil and for certain things to be staged on the project, and then protected that with erosion fencing. So it was a little bit of a hassle, you know, from a contractor standpoint, but in the end, it really made a difference, because that whole kind of prominent corner, which was really the front of the house, was able to be undisturbed. And as we got into the landscaping design, we used native plants, we used drought-tolerant plants, and we tried to minimize the amount of turf area, so less than 33% of the turf. When it came to the building itself, we looked at lightly colored materials, so that even though we knew the roof was going to have photovoltaic panels and solar hot water, we looked at using some lighter colored materials, and looked at where we could put permanent erosion too. So even though you're in an urban environment, most urban environments, all of the stormwater runoff just kind of ends up in the storm sewer. And there's rarely requirements for stormwater management and control on a single family house in an urban environment. But in this case, it was really thought about to try to minimize that impact onto the storms. Just looking at how that handout, you can see that this is the sort of axonometric view, a Google image view of the house. We ended up using that light colored gray metal, which reflects the heat, but also, I lost my cursor, here we go. And then the large photovoltaic array, and then the solar hot water. So this house also combined with geothermal heating and cooling, and ended up being a net zero, what would qualify as net zero today. And but you can see the materials were fairly simple. We ended up using mostly cedar, and at one time we had planned for that to be a transparent stain, but the owner really liked this kind of yellowy mustard color. So we took vertical grain clear cedar and covered it with a solid body stain. So I was a little was against sort of my natural tendency to say that was okay, but they were really committed to using locally milled and sourced materials. And, you know, it has a kind of a fun, jovial color, white trim, and then Doug fir accents. So locally milled Douglas fir timbers. We look to incorporate those drought-tolerant plants. As you can see here, some of them that we used. Moving inside, owning a natural food store, they, you know, were very sensitive to the materials that were being put in their house, and what were they made of, where did they come from, what are the chemical compositions of them. And it's something that I've always been pretty passionate about. As far as the indoor air quality, I think it's one of the most important subjects that Lee does touch upon. Later in the presentation, I'm going to talk about a house we did early on, which was a certified healthy house by the American Lung Association. And that program really focuses more on indoor environmental quality than anything. But you need to take special care to consider what these materials are. 16 years ago, when we were first doing these things, the sort of devil of formaldehyde wasn't even something that people were talking about. But now it's considered a cancer-causing chemical. We're even starting to see class action lawsuits associated with formaldehyde. You might be familiar with Lumber Liquidators' class action lawsuit, where their formaldehyde levels are too high and they didn't properly notify the consumer. And this is a real thing. 15 years ago, people thought, you know, when you told them, hey, you got to be careful about what's in these materials, or what's the laminate, what's the stain made of, what's the glue that holds all this together, people thought, you know, oh, well, that's what the greenies do. But now they're realizing that, you know, this is really affecting people's health to the point where there's now class action lawsuits associated with it, unfortunately. But, you know, we took careful attention to the selection of the paints, stains, glues, adhesives, what the cabinets were made of. They used local woodworkers to make cabinets, all out of natural wood, solid wood products. We minimize the use of even plywood in certain components of the house. And we use low or no VOC paints and finishes. Along with that, there was a real desire to use recycled or reclaimed products. So Katie, who's one of the owners, she went to different salvage stores and looked for sort of interesting architectural elements, and we thought about them, of how they could be incorporated into the house. So you'll see some examples of that. The house is a passive design. It faces solar south. We put a sunroom on the south side with a slab and tile floor, and surrounded it with glass, and had windows and doors that would open up to it, so that could act as sort of thermal mass in the house. In addition, in the center here, there's a Kesheloffen stove, or what you call a Finnish stove, so a masonry heater. It was built by a local mason. And the exhaust, most of the conventional American colonial fireplace, 90% of your heat goes out. Great thing for ambiance and aesthetics, but not a super efficient heating source. So here the exhaust actually goes out the side, down and through a series of tubes, and then back up. And those tubes are worked into the masonry. This was a quartzite stone. Some of them, probably one of the most efficient is like a soapstone product, but the quartzite holds and radiates the heat really well. It's also locally quarried Champlain stone product. And the heat is so efficient that you can actually create a bread oven above it to sort of utilize that excess heat. And the biggest problem with these types of stoves is that you can't continue to burn them. You'll actually overheat your house. So you sort of have 1 or 2 fires throughout the day, and then it's warm enough that mass will radiate out through the rest of the house. The open plan helps us maximize that. And then we typically tie this type of arrangement with the stairway. So in a lot of our houses, you'll see the stairways play sort of a special feature. They're essentially located. It allows us to work with thermal chimneys throughout the house. So let the hot air rise in the summertime and let it get out passively, and then we can close things down or have ceiling fans to help push it down in the wintertime. So that's a very simple geometric solution that makes a big difference in our climate. And we let the staircase usually be open and act as that thermal chimney. You can see here that this house is unique because they have their own business and they work from home a lot, and they have 2 kids at the time that were young and growing, and they had some aging parents that came. And so how do we combine work, live, parents all in one space, and children, and how are they going to grow in the house? We had a front bedroom they're thinking of aging parents in time that they may end up staying here, or his mother, and that initially it would serve as an office, and then a playroom for the children that had a series of large sliding doors that would open up and be able to be a flex space as the children aged, and you want to be able to close those doors so you don't see the mess when guests come over sometimes, but later on in life, it just becomes sort of an extension of the dining room and the living room. And the family is very musically oriented, so we had a sound rated room where they had the piano and they could practice, and Katie teaches piano lessons, so when she has people over and she's teaching people, they can sort of kind of isolate that from the rest of the house. The materials inside, a combination of poplar and cherry, and simple, and a lot of pine, tongue and groove pine planking, locally sourced and milled. All the wood and timber in this house was an FSC certified sources, so that was something that they were really committed to. And this was in 2009, 2010, so it was a little harder back then to find all the sources for that, but that was something we were able to do. Coming from sustainably managed forests and was a priority for everyone in the project. You can see as you move to the second floor, it's really that open plan continues. So a lot of our designs, we try to avoid hallways. So the most efficient and cost-effective structure to build is a square, right? So your ratio of exterior wall to interior wall is 1-to-1. And also, we often try to design on a 2-foot module so that we're really minimizing construction waste. Probably one of the biggest achievements of this house is the builder who was hired, and the carpenter really took minimizing construction waste to heart. So we planned out, we did 2-foot framing, we planned out all the studs, all the sheets of plywood, and then any of the scrap studs he kept and stockpiled and used for blocking or for infill. So at the end of he had a picture at the end of that, which I wish I had, of what was left at the end of the job, and it was really an amazing thing. And I give complete credit of that to the builder, managing the crews and thinking through things through the job, so really minimal waste. Fairly simple plan, second floor master suite with the two spare bedrooms for the 2 children. You'll notice in the plan we stacked all the plumbing kind of in one area, which is really over in this area, and that kind of translates down through all the plans. The HVAC system was a high-efficiency system. I mentioned about the geothermal, put high filtering in, and also humidification control. So moving up, probably the most unique feature is that they also teach movement and dance classes. So where are they going to put this space? And originally we thought of it as its own little barn or its own little structure that might be on that second lot, or it might be an appendage. And really through planning, we said, let's keep this as efficient as we can. And we stacked these things. We had a side door that comes into that stair there, and they go up one flight up into the music room. So this is more of a public space. And then some overflow sleeping bedroom, but this is the movement space here. Here's that stair that opens all the way down to below. You'll see that we put a door at the top and some windows, so if they want to close it off and try to separate sound, we can do that. But allow that thermal chimney to take effect. So here's some pictures of how that worked. Just a little overview of that. Of course, we looked at low flow and toilets and fixtures. There was a high performance windows. and then did the 2-foot framing and then the irrigation system. So they did actually put rainwater catchment in this house as well. So they're gardeners and active. They grow a lot of food that they like to eat, and so we collected the rainwater off the roof, put that into a cistern, and then made that available for their irrigation needs as well. But you can see how the house, really kind of a simple footprint. It kind of looks like an old timber frame barn with that stair that wraps up the one side, the north side. Just some highlights of that. We really tried to keep the planting a variety of perennial flowers and then bushes and native plants and mulch. And we kept the turf area really to that southern face, which would be the open area where the children could play. So highlighting that Kesheloff and stove, I think there's opportunities to, this is a technology that's thousands of years old, combined with simple geometry. And even though we added the technology, I always say start with the simple first. So how do you place the structure on the lot? Where are the winds coming from? Where is the solar access? How are the overhangs designed? Set those overhangs to block the summer sun, but let the winter sun in. Combine it with simple technology first, and then add the high-tech stuff. So, 80% of our projects just do that, and we don't get to the high-tech stuff. Not everybody can afford a geothermal system or humidification or house controls or energy controls, but most people, if you just in simple planning from day one, it can be accommodated. Just looking through the space, some of the, we use a series of reclaimed beams. Some of the light fixtures were reclaimed from salvage sources as well. There's some of those elements, these stained glass panels, and so we incorporated some of them as transoms. This was the west side here, that overflow first floor bedroom office, and it had a large glass window that faced out, so we wanted to try to bring some of that light deeper into the space. So between the cupola over the stair and using transom windows in certain areas, we were able to get light to penetrate deeper into the core of the plan. There's a reclaimed sink that Katie found, and a reclaimed light, salvage light. We even found these kind of wire mesh fabric that had a floral design, and cut that into using that for pantry. So this was their main pantry. So we reused that fabric as a decorative element. And you can see the client liked bold colors, so inside and out. So this was a fun project, but a lot of here you can see the crushed stone. We really did a crushed stone drip edge all the way around the property. We did what's considered a drip strip design, so we minimized gutters on the house. We let the water come down, hit that crushed stone perimeter, and in the bottom of that is a rubber membrane with a pipe, and that got directed to the cistern also, and then an overflow out to the storm. So we were able to really capture all the runoff on the house first, manage it, and that drip strip acts as a the first few feet allows that to absorb and transpire, and then if it gets saturated, it gets directed to the cistern, and then if it goes beyond the cistern, it gets piped to the storm drain. Some of the different angles of the house. This is the north side. So moving on to something that's a little bit more Adirondack focused. This is a project that was recently finished, the final details of which we worked. We were committed to having this be a LEED certified project. It's on Lake George, it's in Hague and in the park. And we worked with Stephen Winters Associates, and Kevin and Josh Stack actually was our independent testing and verification, and we started with a collaborative meeting of, hey, here's our idea for this project. And I can't stress enough how important that is. And if you can, I think as architects, it's hard sometimes because you say, depending upon the client's needs, they're in a hurry, they want to get going. And to pause a little bit and say, hey, let's vet some things. Let's talk about things. What are the goals of the project? And this was a great, pretty much an all-day session that Kevin led, and thank you for that. But it kind of, even as being the architect, it's good to sort of stop and listen to what other people are saying. And there's some things that may come out of that you didn't think possible. And in this case, it was true. It was a previously one-story camp that was quite antiquated and in sort of tough shape. And we ended up really coming up with a design that was almost in the exact same footprint as that one-story camp. The exception is the separate new two-story or two-car garage. So the one-story ranch was pretty much right here. It was slightly thinner, but it was slightly longer than the proposed design. So how do you come up with a new house that's going to incorporate a growing family with lots of visiting family area that they hope will be a multi-generational structure, but also not mess up the site and not impact the site too much? So we went from a one-story program to a three-story program. And given its proximity to Lake George is sort of unique where it forces a lot of architects, designers, owners, whoever, to really think about these site conditions and environmental impacts. And it's sort of unique. You have the Lake George Park Commission, you have New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, you have the Adirondack Park Agency, you have the Lake George Association. So you have 4 different organizations that are either trying to educate you about impacts to the lake and the natural environment, or they're regulating you as far as these are the rules that you must follow. And so we took that to heart and said we really want to go above and beyond those rules and regulations. We want to be in excess of that. So the site design and the stormwater control management was a big part of the selection and layout of the project. And you'll see later some series of rain gardens. We really minimized turf to be a small strip that went around the north side, and then a little strip across the front here. And then everything else was a series of bioswales and rain gardens and mulched areas to capture and control and mitigate any runoff to the lake. We also planted a new buffer that didn't exist. So previously the one-story ranch, there was a lawn that just kind of went right to the lake's edge, and there was a little bit of a stone buffer, but really it was just lawn going right to the water's edge, which is something you really should try to eliminate. So this was a new buffer was planted in here, and these are the areas that this was all a series of rain gardens, drip strips, a large rain garden here that then swooped across the front of the house, and then a series of terracing rain gardens up this side. So we were really able to do a lot there as far as treat any improve the previous condition, but the post condition we were well in excess of the previous condition. And then again, we used as much as we could local plantings, native plants, and some drought tolerant planting. So looking at the house, again, this was essentially the footprint of the old ranch. So how do we get this new design to work within that? And thinking about a 3-story design that would accommodate a growing family and also allow for overflow. Desire to have an office here as well. So on the lower level, we had a guest overflow sleeping, but also would serve as a main office, rec room, and guest quarters. Moving up, you have a large family gathering area, master suite, and then the kitchen. This faces east, so one of the struggles when you deal with lake properties and you want to try to incorporate passive technologies, everyone wants to face the lake. So, this faced east, which was better than facing west as far as a design challenge. But we did try to minimize the openings on the north and west side. So, and then maximize openings on the east and south side, particularly southeast side. Designed the house to really open up and grow. So a lot of, summer homes, they peak population is in the summertime, obviously, but then how do you cocoon back into the wintertime? And so we thought about that in the plan. So rather than building more heated and cooled square footage, we really put a large screen porch off that east side. And there was some concern that, well, you're going to be blocking the views and you block the light and things like that. But what we found is when you open all of those sliding doors open and you open the main living space to that screen porch, it just feels like one space. And that the client and their guests have a tendency to mill through that whole area. And then in the wintertime, it is closed down and it is a little bit more of a cocoon feeling into the core of the plan. And then moving up is just the two bedrooms for the children, sort of efficient bath. You can see again, in this design, we use the stairs to be a thermal chimney. It's vaulted up to that main level with a series of two ceiling fans that are reversible. So in the wintertime, we have them set to be on gently, pushing down. In the summertime, we have them sucking up. Most of the bedrooms are designed for cross ventilation, so with that, tied to that thermal chimney that stair provides, and you leave the doors open and some windows cracked, you really create a negative pressure in the house, so that when you're in the lower spaces, it's almost like a cool breeze is happening all the time, because it has a tendency to pull up through the central core. Materials in this house were all white oak material. It's locally milled and sourced. A lot of the accents that you see in here, some of the columns and the wainscoting were also reclaimed material. That came from a company called Storied Boards in Lake George. And if you haven't heard about them, they're a great company to look up. They go and salvage different barns stick by stick, and they clean them, kill and dry them, and then they give you a chain of custody to the original owner and what the story behind that structure was, where it came from, who was the family that built it. Great company. So we tried to highlight them a little bit, use some of their materials throughout the project. So this building also incorporated geothermal heating and cooling as a combination of radiant heat with forced air. The transfer switch was added and put in to add a solar voltaic array a little later. So right now the house is used more seasonally than year-round, and the owner also felt that the technology is probably just going to continue to get better and better. Goal is to eventually retire and be more year-round in this facility, so the owner wanted to have the ability to add those panels when that happened. Some of the other elements that were added were the insulated concrete forms for the entire lower level. That's mostly earth bermed. That comes in at about an R50 once the concrete is in. The roof was all a SIP panel roof, and along with a radiant barrier. So both the roof and the walls used high insulative materials, but then an additional radiant barrier was added, which is a foil face bubble wrap. In this case, it was a Prodex material. So it really upped the thermal envelope of the house, getting us to near R70 in the roof and almost R40 in the walls, along with an R50 lower level. So the house is very snug and very heat efficient and cooling efficient. And it's that what we've found is that radiant slab in the lower level, once that's the only place where we put radiant other than the tile floor, a couple small tile areas in the main level. But once the radiant slab is heated up with that high performance envelope, along with some solar heat gain in the wintertime, the house stays at a very comfortable temperature with very little energy. And that's, a combination of technology, but also geometry. Some of the additional pictures. You can see here where we've put this new buffer in, shoreline buffer, and had the turf limited to the front and the side. And again, we've used this pretty deep drip strip. So all that runoff comes and hits the same technology that we used in the house before. It's all piped underneath and then gets directed to the rain gardens if needed. You can see that there's a little bit of pretty good topography on that driveway side. So there's a mountainous area to this side, which would be the west side. So we knew that during big rain events, this was going to get a lot of water. So this entire area across the front and around here, we made one large rain garden bioswale so that the water could all get in there, soak in, and any overflow would then go down the series of drip strips to another rain garden. And then if it got beyond that, you would have a vegetative buffer before it hit the lake. And it ends up being, we think, nice aesthetic change from a landscape design, the different materials, the rocks, and so on. This is sort of standing in the middle of that, so you can see it becomes a bit of a sculptural element. This house was influenced a little bit by Japanese design, sort of a classic pagoda layout, so the layering of the Doug fir soffits and different materials. This was a poplar bark siding and then bark-on white cedar. So the bark-on white cedar was locally harvested and milled. The poplar bark came from a little bit farther away. But that combined with the locally quarried stone gave, other than the timber accents, which are typically tucked up under the eave, it becomes a sort of a maintenance-free building. So you don't stain or paint any of these materials in the last decades with really minimal maintenance. And so the soffits and the timbers are the things that will require maintenance, but they're tucked up under the eaves, so they get minimal UV exposure and really no moisture exposure. So those really need to be stained and painted every 7 to 10 years rather than every 3 or 4 years that a conventional cedar house or timber might need. Just looking at some of the interiors here, being sort of a summer place, the owners decided to have this combination of sort of Adirondack materials, but with light, airy finishes as well. So a neutral palette with grays and blues and whites. Conventional Rumsford fireplace here. This was made by a local mason. So this was a guilty pleasure that was added to the design for winter use. And it does throw the heat across that room pretty nicely. Lighting throughout the house was all LED. We even sourced a LED bulb that looks like the classic Edison bulb. So when we had exposed fixtures or decorative fixtures, we were able to find a great substitute for that. And about 80% of all the lights are on a dimmer as well. So we found LEDs that were, anyone who is very familiar with LED lighting, the dimming capability has been a little rough up until recently. So they're really quite good now if you look in the right places. So just some additional accents. Here's that reclaimed material. Some of the stone. This is a new Baltimore stone. This is quarried just south of Albany. And we're very blessed to be here in the Adirondacks. We have access to a lot of natural resources that you might not have in other parts of the country. So in a lot of our structures, we can get wood, timber, stone, things really within 100 miles usually. So we're lucky in that sort. This was a local blacksmith that made that fire grate as well. Yep. Running, okay. How much longer? Okay, so just going through some of these. Here you can see where we reused some of the excess siding material. We decided to bring it inside and use it as wainscoting in the bathroom. These were salvaged wine boxes and crates that were tied in with a locally made blacksmith did that frame. So I want to make sure I leave room for a question and answer. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of give you a quick overview of some of the final products associated with this. There's that drift ship again. Okay, so quickly I'm going to talk about the bio building. Shortly after they opened, the facility really needed to focus on sort of back of the house. So the biologists and the wildlife and the maintenance and storage. And how do you do that in a way that complements this beautiful structure that HOK designed? And so I was lucky enough to be hired as the local architect of record, working with HOK and Chip Ray, who did the initial conceptualization for the bio building. But we had a group meeting, all of us together, and looked at, how could this fit in? How could this really be a symbol of sustainability? It was around that time that the staff here decided that they should try to get the entire campus LEED certified. So this was a building that was looked at very much of how could we contribute a lot to that mission, particularly when it came to energy and form. So some of the things that, big things, I mean, this was one of the largest green roofs in the area at the time. We worked with a company out of Vermont that really hand planted all of these. So this wasn't, it wasn't a trough system, it was an individual soil system with individual plants planted. And even today, that roof is doing pretty good. I always look at that when I first come in and say, how's that doing? And it always, they take on kind of an evolution of plants and so on. But the north side is the green roof, and the south side is the solar panel. It's a 62.5 kilowatt array. So last I checked, it was well exceeding any power consumption in the bio building, back feeding into the grid. So. And unfortunately, the museum uses a lot of power, so we really helped offset that use. So, normally these things have a tendency to be kind of prefabricated metal building, maintenance buildings. It's like, oh, that's the maintenance building. But in this case, I think it really became a gem as a interesting visual icon and complementary to the museum itself. The museum and this building use a lot of locally milled bark-on white cedar log siding as accents at the time, and then also locally milled rough Adirondack pine siding. The plan was fairly simple. Created office area for the staff, flexible office area, some small offices, a conference room, some support space, and then the maintenance building along with the biologists area and the quarantine area to treat the different animals and wildlife that are their guests at the Wild Center. Some pictures of that as it was finishing construction. And planting the roofs, you can see I still was amazed at how they did this, and really was a labor of love. We had to study that slope very carefully, and we put a series of little break dams in the soil so that it wouldn't, the soil wouldn't erode off the roof in a really heavy rain event. And now that the plants have really matured, it's doing what it needs to do as far as minimizing runoff and staying cool. So a quick overview of that and the different features that we incorporated. Obviously the solar, the green roof, the laminated trusses. We used foam insulation. Again, a lot of highly recycled content in all the materials, the flooring, carpeting, rubber base, zero VOC or low VOC paints and finishes. And then we even looked at the CFC and HCFC content in the foam. So I'm going to glance over this one because I want to end with, this was another project. This was the first certified healthy home in Northeast, and it was in a 2004 showcase home in Saratoga Springs, which was really to benefit a local charity. And it was the first sort of green home in the Saratoga area and ended up sweeping the awards that year, which I was proud of, not about getting design awards, but I was happy that a green home that was very sustainably minded would be recognized for its aesthetics. And a lot of people who went through the house, some picked up and understood what was in it and why it was environmentally friendly. But it was after that we were able to sort of tell the story. We were able to use that as a platform of, hey, did you know that the following things were accomplished in this house? And again, very similar technologies of the other two houses that I talked to you about. And some of the finished pictures here, again, the house was on the east-west axis. We used a cupola for a thermal chimney, centrally located the stair. We designed the overhangs to block the summer sun and let in the winter sun. We purposely had the dining room be on a slab with tile floor and use this as a thermal mass here. And we want to encourage the sun to come in and heat that area up, and then thermal convection, create thermal convection in the house. Cross ventilation in the bedrooms. And here you see a series of sort of natural materials. Here's that slab that extends all the way into the dining area. Again, a lot of our designs, we try to incorporate decks or screen porches to allow clients to have these overflow or expand out, but not necessarily have to create more space, more heating and cooled space. Allow them to live in the house seasonally, experience that connection, the natural environment. So I'll end with this, and this isn't necessarily specific to sustainable design, but it has a lot to do with what we're about and why our mission is to be environmentally responsible in what we do. We're bound a lot by our clients and what their desires are and their decisions are. But as architects and builders and engineers and consumers, you really have a responsibility every day in the choices you make, not only in your maybe your bottle of water or your snack, but also what you're going to live in and how you're going to live. And I tell my staff all the time, we really need to listen carefully. We need to observe carefully. We need to observe with an open mind. So don't come to a project with preconceived solutions. And it's very easy as architects and designers to do that. I mean, let's face it, architects are known for their ego, right? We're really about leaving egos out. We have a philosophy that we need to respond to the site and context. Every project is unique. If you look at our projects, there isn't one distinct style. There may be similarities from one house to the next, but we really believe in responding individually to the site and context and how that structure can respond to the environment, no matter where that environment is, whether it's in a forest or an undeveloped area or a remote area or in an urban environment. All of those environments tell you something. There's things there that cue you into what you should do. And I challenge my staff to observe that and to respond to it. Leave the egos out and allow the best ideas to rise to the surface. So oftentimes I'm a client or an intern or even a young architect. We try to have little charrettes during the process of every project so that more than one opinion is weighing in, sort of a peer review. Oftentimes the best ideas come from someone who hasn't done that kind of project yet. They're sort of coming into it with this innocence that can influence things in a really positive way. Always leave when you're done. The project should enhance the context and the community that it's associated with, whether that's an urban environment again or purely a natural environment. Both have environmental repercussions. Both should be responsive. Both should be enhanced by what we do rather than damaged by what we do. Part of that is minimizing your impacts to the natural environment, no matter, again, where you are, whether it's urban or natural. You look around you. What you do will impact things. It's not hard to see just down the block of, oh, if I do this, what might happen here? It's something we need to continue to think about. And I'll recognize that I think if we've ever had any failures or where we feel a project maybe has not gone as well as it could have gone, it always comes back to communication. And so I'm always saying communicate, communicate, communicate. Don't make assumptions. Make sure you're you and the client and the team all really understand the goals. It's easy to get caught up in your own mind and say, well, this is the solution, or I think they're on board. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes it's not clearly understood. And then recognize every member really has an important and vital role on the project, no matter who that member is, no matter what level that member is. And of course, we try to seek like-minded people when we can. Sometimes you're a big fish in a small pond and vice versa, but we're always looking for those who sort of have the same priorities. And lastly, let's really enjoy what you're doing. Enjoy the process. It's, the design, architecture, interior design, there's a very creative side, and then there's a very technical side, and then there's a liability side. And sometimes your vision for those things can get clouded by the other one. But remember, it's a process, and enjoy that process. And that what you're doing is really changing people's lives. You have the ability to change people's lives with these decisions and with what you do and how you design it. But enjoy that process. All right. Thank you. Pause there.
Great, thanks, Mike. We have a few minutes for questions. Anybody?